Hello, Lacrow here. Just a quick little intro and explanation before we get into the actual video. For the past few months, we've been working on a little side project of recording podfics for various Spy Family fanfictions, either written by us or our close friends. Now that this channel is up, we're going to slowly transition them over each week, probably in between update weeks, since there's not a lot of content during that time. It's a lot of fun recording these, and hopefully they're just as fun to listen to. Hope you all enjoy. Story: Mission Files, Family, Forger by Lacrow. Summary: a collection of one-shots focused on the Forgers and the various situations they find themselves in. Chapter 1, Mission 001, Flowers for Mrs. Forger. I've some business to attend to today, Lloyd informed his wife and daughter as he put on his coat and made his way for the door. I should be home in time to cook dinner. Yor and Anya smiled and waved him off. Though it wasn't unusual for Lloyd to have work on the weekends, it did strike them as odd that he would be called in at such an early hour, and on a Sunday no less. At least Yor found it odd anyway. Anya knew very well that her papa didn't have any patients to take care of, but instead the fate of the free world. Possibly. She didn't really get a chance to read his mind before he walked out the door to confirm. She kind of spaced out thinking about when Bondman was supposed to come on next. Left to their own devices, the Forger women would go through the motions of a typical Sunday morning. In lieu of cooking breakfast like Lloyd would, and in an effort to spare Anya from food poisoning, Yor poured her daughter some cereal and sat on the couch while Anya took up her spot in front of the TV. With Spyhound Bond faithfully next to her, Anya stared at her favorite program as she scooped up sugar bombs absently into her mouth. Yor knew that Lloyd would rather her be studying, but it was a Sunday. Besides, she mused, it was adorable. After that, Anya handed Mama her empty bowl and went off to go play spy with Bond. Yor heard the two of them as she washed the dishes. They crept sneakily around the hallway in order to save the Prime Minister from a bomb that may or may not have been concealed inside a penguin. Honestly, Yor had no idea where she came up with half of this stuff, but was at least content knowing that her daughter had quite the imagination. Their play session didn't last long anyway. After about a half hour or so, both Anya and Bond wandered into the living room, bored. How about we go for a walk? Yor suggested with a smile. Anya perked at the opportunity. About 20 minutes and a change of clothes later, and the Forgers were out and about. Bond waddled in front of them as they walked down the sidewalk. With no real destination, they simply enjoyed the sunshine and waved to several people on their commute. The girls received compliments on their matching sun hats, which Lloyd had been nice enough to get them at Anya's request. Neither he nor Yor could have guessed that she had done so in order to make the whole mother-daughter thing more official. Matching clothes meant a closer family, right? They went down a street normally not taken. Yor knew where they were, of course, but usually didn't have any reason to come this way. The only noteworthy thing around was a cemetery, but Anya was leading and they didn't need to be anywhere in particular. Hand in hand, they shuffled past it. Yor passively glanced at the rows of tombstones on the other side of the waist-high wooden fence, and immediately she paused. There, facing them, but unaware of their presence, was Lloyd. Her eyes widened, as did Anya's, though that had more to do with her being pulled back by Mama's dead weight. Completely taken aback, Yor pulled her daughter over to a nearby sign and hid behind it. She poked her head out. What was he doing here? A half bouquet of blue flowers rested in his hands as he loomed over one of the tombstones, and immediately Yor's head began to spiral. Oh no. Was he visiting his first wife's grave? His real wife? The thought hit her like a sucker punch. She reeled before looking down to Anya, who was also peeking out to see what was going on. In an instant, Yor scooped up her daughter and started to walk away. Bond, though completely forgotten, followed behind faithfully as they made their escape. Anya clamored to read her father's mind. She wanted to know what he was doing there just as bad as Mama. He was far away, but she managed to glean just enough off the top of his head to figure out what was going on before Yor ran off with her completely. Cipher G. Next. Contact. Further instructions. Spy stuff. Just like that episode in Bond Man, where the hero spy fakes his own death and pops out of the grave after the coast is clear? Well, not exactly that, but Anya got the picture. Mama most certainly didn't, though, and Anya could tell as much from just a quick pop-in on her thoughts. First wife? Oh, she thought Papa was there for the wife he made up for a cover. That completely made-up story about her passing away 2 years ago. Now, all of a sudden, it seemed super real. Anya, of course, knew it wasn't, but Mama... She could say nothing to comfort or reassure her, as it would blow both their covers. In the meantime, all Anya could do was hold on to her mama tight as she made a beeline back home. Heavy scarlet burned her face, and Anya could feel it on her cheeks. She was embarrassed and sad and felt guilty. For what, though? She didn't do anything wrong. Hopefully, Papa could make her feel better when he got home. The sounds of splashing echoed from the hallway as Anya took her bath for the evening. Both Yor and Lloyd had learned pretty early on that to be in the bathroom while she played was guaranteed to end in them getting soaked as well, so they both simply waited for her to finish outside. It was all the same to Lloyd, who sat at the table and flipped through the Sunday paper that he hadn't been able to read until just now. Sports, classifieds, comics, and entertainment sections were taken out and sprawled out on the table. All he cared about were the current events. Tiny clangs of a teapot lid rattling pulled his attention away for a brief moment, if only out of politeness. He smiled at Yor as she approached from behind to pour him some tea, and after a brief moment of hesitation, she smiled back. The gesture was fleeting, but Lloyd always paid attention to everything. He found it odd, but said nothing on the matter. It wasn't until a moment later, when Yor came around the other side of the table to pull up a chair for herself, that he suspected something was on her mind. She sipped some tea and then stared down at the brown liquid in her cup. "Lloyd, can I ask you something?" she inquired, sparing him a glance. "Of course," he blinked. The paper in his hands fell to the wayside as he gave her his attention. "I just wanted to know," there was no easy way to phrase this, "what your wife was like." Lloyd paused. Immediately, the cogs in his head started to turn, but he replied quickly to save face. "My wife?" "Your real wife." She started up, before catching herself. I mean, your first wife." Again, it felt wrong. "That is to say, Anya's birth mom." Time stopped for Lloyd. In his head, he jumped through what felt like 30 hoops in order to come up with something. This was probably one of the biggest mistakes of his entire spy career. Never once did he think of a convincing story about his fake former wife. All he ever told people was that she passed away, but offered no other details that would placate someone nosy. That, of course, wasn't to say that Yor was nosy, no. If anything, he should have anticipated being asked this question by her. After all, she was pretending to be his wife. Of course she'd be interested in knowing. "Ah, my wife." He lowered his head as if to show grief. "Well, I remember her to be a kind soul, always willing to help others." Yor nodded intently. She stared at him, hands clasped tightly over her teacup, as she waited for him to continue. "She was a florist." He had no idea why he chose that profession, but he rolled with it. "I went into her shop one day to buy flowers for a patient, and it was love at first sight." A florist? Yor thought back to her seeing him at the graveside, and remembered the bouquet in his hands. How lovely. Did she have a favorite flower? "Blue." Lloyd replied automatically before internally cringing at his own stupidity. She asked what kind of flower, not what color. Anything blue. It was her favorite color. Just like the ones he had in his hands, Yor thought to herself as she looked down at her tea. Maybe today was their anniversary. Was that it? Or perhaps her birthday? She supposed the reason didn't particularly matter, just the fact that he was currently still thinking about her was enough to make Yor think of ways to cheer him up. Lloyd didn't seem sad, but then again he never did. His demeanor was always so pleasant, save for when Anya made him cross, that she failed to remember that his family was broken. She was just pretending to be his wife, but he had an actual one, at one point. Not anymore. Now all he had was her, a fake wife who could barely cook for her family without almost killing them. Their marriage was a sham. That was their joint agreement, but Yor couldn't help but to feel like she got the better end of the deal. Lloyd was charming, a good father, an excellent husband, and she was barely able to watch their daughter. No, their daughter. Lloyd and his late wife's daughter. Yor loved Anya, but at the moment she couldn't help but feel like a stranger in her own home. But again, it wasn't her home. She was just a stranger. She wasn't anything. No. This wasn't about her right now. Yor's internal dilemma struck like lightning, and her self-piteous thoughts disappeared just as quickly. She should be focused on Lloyd right now. He missed his wife, and she had to do something, anything, for him. The reflection that stared up at Yor from the tea in her cup showed the cycle of emotions that wheeled across her face. She seemed to completely forget that she was in the middle of a conversation just now. Well, at least she had been, anyway. It quickly became apparent to Lloyd that she had checked out already. And he was more than okay with that. He had no way of knowing all the things running through his wife's mind at the moment, and just assumed that he had satisfied her with his answers. She failed to see him sigh in relief before getting up to check on Anya, though paused when she felt his hand briefly touch her shoulder. Yor looked up to find him glance at her with a smile before walking away, and he disappeared around the corner. At that point, left by herself, Yor needed no more convincing. She was going to make her husband happy, even if it was the last thing she'd ever do. This might be the last thing she'd ever do. She was going to kill herself with these shears. They were so much bigger than normal scissors. How had a florist never accidentally chopped their own finger off before? Wait a minute. Had they? Was that how Lloyd's wife passed away? Yor became mortified at the thought. Was flower arrangement truly such a dangerous profession? She was an assassin, but never once dreamed that florists dealt with such perils. Suddenly, a whole new appreciation for Lloyd's first wife swept over Yor as she imagined her fighting flower and customer alike with her shears. Okay, maybe it wasn't that dangerous. Still, Yor had nicked herself a couple of times. It was hard to see what she was doing when a whole bundle of flowers stuck in her face as she tried to trim the other side down. It was an awkward position, but she had to do it this way. She used her chin to keep the whole thing in place, otherwise it would come out uneven. There was probably an easier way to do this, though if there was, she hadn't bothered to ask. The florist she talked to only gave her the briefest of pointers before selling her what she needed and scooting her out of the store. Yor sighed. She had intended to just buy something for Lloyd, but that didn't end up working for several reasons. First and foremost, they didn't have what she wanted. She visited several shops, and all were either sold out of wreaths or were on back order for days. Yor wanted to get him something as soon as possible, since she didn't know what the occasion was, if there was one, that spurred him to visit her grave. That led to reason number 2 of why she took it upon herself to make him one. She didn't feel like simply buying him something would mean all that much to Lloyd. He had already bought flowers. If there was something else she could have gotten him, Yor hadn't dug deep enough to find out. All she knew was that his first wife liked blue flowers, and she'd just go off of that. A nice wreath was different enough from a bouquet to be its own thing, and it could fit for multiple occasions. Them being sold out everywhere, however, meant that she had to make her own, and that, Yor quickly found out, was difficult. So much so, in fact, that she ended up calling into work that day. This wasn't something that she could do in a couple of hours. This was a process. A process that she was hopelessly ill-prepared for. Messed up flowers and half-cut stems littered the floor of her apartment as she struggled to contain it all. She had bought plenty of flowers to burn through as she knew there would be mistakes. Her bank account certainly hated her for it. And Yor thanked whatever got above that Lloyd was out at work and Anya was at school. She had the place to herself, though that amounted to little when she only had half a day to get this all done before they got home. There had been progress made, to be sure, but it was slow going. One would assume her unique set of skills would have prepared her for this sort of thing. Cutting up bodies and cutting up flowers ended up being two very different things, however, and Yor knew she had her work cut out for her, pun unintended. Despite this, or perhaps because of it, Yor hunkered down. She took a deep breath and, after taking a moment to calm herself, lifted her head up confidently. This was for Lloyd. She knew that he would do the same thing for her if she was feeling down, so there was no reason to complain. Yor grabbed her shears and got right back to work. The sounds of steady snipping filled the Forger household, and she became lost in her arrangement once more. Yor waited until Anya had gone to bed that night. Part of her wanted to share it with her, but she also didn't want to stir up any possible bad memories. Things proceeded normally when Lloyd arrived home. The only thing out of the ordinary was the fact that Yor was home before him, which he pointed out as he walked through the door. Yor simply stated that she'd had a headache and asked to go home a little early. Aside from the look of mild concern that swept across Lloyd's face, her story was accepted without incident. Anya arrived from school soon after, and the three of them went about their daily rituals as usual. Lloyd got to work on dinner. Anya grumbled as she was denied cartoons. Yor, meanwhile, took Bond outside to go potty. They ate, they talked, they showered, and Anya was put to bed. Yor was the one to tuck her in, and unbeknownst to her, the young forger was reading her mind the whole time. She failed to notice the smug look on her daughter's face as the lights were turned off, the mental image of what Mama had planned for Papa being enough to bring out that diabolical side of hers. She, of course, said nothing and simply went to bed, content knowing that what started off as a big misunderstanding had turned into an opportunity, one that she unfortunately wouldn't get to see. Regardless, Anya wished her mama luck as she snuggled up next to her penguin plush and quickly drifted off to sleep. With Anya in bed, Yor made her way to the closet in her room. She dashed in and out, returning with the fruits of her labor. Yor gave a quick pause to look over the arrangement she made. It wasn't the best looking thing in the world, she admitted, but, well, it was the best that she could do. She anxiously fiddled with the loose flower here and there before finally relenting with a sigh. It was time. She hid the thing behind her as best she could before walking into the living room where Lloyd was sitting on the couch. He was absently flipping through another one of Anya's Bondman comics, a habit he'd first picked up after trying to figure out why she liked the thing so much. He looked up at the feeling of eyes on him, and his own eyes widened in surprise. There was something behind her, but for the life of him, he didn't know what. Yor bit her lip to shore up some confidence, and Lloyd sat the comic down next to him. She had his attention. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you this sooner," she started, finding it difficult to look directly at him. "But I saw you at the cemetery the other day." Lloyd's eyes widened even more. Crap! He knew he should have been facing towards the street. Yes, I was visiting someone." "Your wife," Yor stated quietly. Lloyd froze at the mention of his made-up former spouse. "That's why I asked you about her." "I see." Damn, he understood now. Yor was upset because she thought he still loved his first wife. Was that it? That was not good for the mission. If she assumed that he was still hung up on his former partner, that might cause a rift between the two of them. That might then lead to conflict and, in the worst-case scenario, divorce. The threat of such a thing happening was enough to make Lloyd's head spin, and he scanned Yor's face to either confirm or deny his suspicions. The expression she had on at the moment didn't seem upset. Quite the contrary, actually. Her face was red, but not out of anger. Her lip quivered, though seemingly not because she wanted to cry. If he didn't know any better, he'd have said she was embarrassed. "I don't know anything about your marriage with her," Yor admitted as she brought the wreath around her, "but I wanted to make you something to remember her by." Lloyd was struck speechless as Yor's handiwork came into view. It was a large wreath of blue flowers of varying sizes, strung somewhat neatly around what looked like an empty, clear picture frame. The frame itself was lopsided. Stray stems and leaves poked out every which way, and the sides of the wreath itself were grossly uneven. Had Yor said she bought the thing, Lloyd would have gotten mad for her and immediately demanded the place refund her money. But she just said that she made that. Made, as in with her own two hands. A flower wreath. Where on earth had she learned how to do that? Yor. For the first time ever, Westalis' greatest spy was left dumbfounded. I don't know what to say. "I know our marriage is a sham," she smiled somberly, "so I figured reminding you of your actual wife might make you happy." Lloyd's breath hitched. He just stared, open-mouthed, as Yor held the wreath up for him. He said nothing, and as the seconds ticked by, she started to become nervous. In an effort to fill the static, she pointed to the frame and explained that he could put a picture of the three of them there. Lloyd, his first wife, and Anya. They could even hang it up on the wall, and leave it there long after the flowers wilted. She didn't mind. This was his home, after all. She was just living there, Yor mused aloud. It didn't bother her one bit to be reminded of that. They could take it down whenever company came over, but the rest of the time it could be up there where it should be. She waited for Lloyd to agree, but he continued to say nothing. Her painted-on smile turned slowly into a frown. Was he upset? Did she do the wrong thing in making something that would remind him of her? Maybe it still hurt. Maybe that was why he was in the cemetery in the first place. This whole fake marriage of theirs only stirred up feelings best left forgotten, and now it was all coming to a head. Yor lowered the wreath and stared at her equally fake husband. Salt water stung her eyes as she suddenly started to feel like a complete idiot. She'd messed up royally this time. "Sham marriage or not, you're my wife now." Lloyd finally spoke up, causing Yor to suck in air. "And I can think of no one else I'd rather have help me raise my daughter." He smiled at her, that bright, comforting beam that he was nice enough to grace her with on a few occasions. This time, though, York couldn't hold it together at the sight of it. She lowered her head and bit her lip to keep from crying, but a few stray tears fell to the floor regardless. Before she knew it, her arms became lighter as the wreath was pulled out from under her. An arm wrapped around her, and Lloyd pulled her in for a hug. Yor didn't have any sense to be embarrassed like she would be usually. All she could do was accept his comfort, and try to regain her wits about her. "I think," he began as Yor sniffed in his embrace, "we'll put our family portrait in here." Lloyd held up the wreath in his free hand. He said it to cheer her up, but immediately regretted doing so when she choked out her tears. In a panic, he frantically placed the arrangement on the coffee table and wrapped his other arm around her. He closed his eyes as sweat beaded on his forehead. He really needed practice in the comforting department. Hot tears soaked Lloyd's sweater, and he wished there was some way to stop them from coming. Not because he gave a damn about his laundry, but because he just wanted Yor to stop crying. She deserved better than that. "I'd like that." Yor huffed into his chest before bringing her head up. A flushed, wet smile hovered mere inches from his face. Another first. Scarlet red stained Lloyd's cheeks, and his thoughts escaped him. He quickly swallowed whatever words he'd started to prepare and resigned himself to simply continue holding his wife. His fake wife. In their fake apartment, while their fake daughter slept sound asleep next door. This entire life he'd created for himself was fake, but the blood that pumped vigorously in his veins at that moment was anything but. The tears that stained his shirt were real too, and the feeling in his gut as Yor looked up at him with admiration in her eyes, he'd felt nothing more real in his entire life.